Hello, everyone. I am Stephen Drew, and here we are. We're actually here in September, aren't we, Katya? But this is the point. Oh, I said your name already. My hosting skills. I got to practice this. So when you do your podcast, don't do it like this. But I am here in September with the fantastic guest, Katya Veleva, from the architecture community and the BIM community, but now doing something which I think is equally interesting and arguably, in my personal opinion, more profound. So Katya is director of Blush Cloud. And so what you do at Blush Cloud, I think, changes the atmosphere. I know that is your tagline. But it's to do with diversity and inclusivity and making teams more productive, more happy, and more awesome in the world. Katya, how are you today?
Hi, Stephen. Thank you so much for having me. It's a beautiful day today, and I'm really excited to talk to you.
Amazing. All right. That's so cool. So we are going to talk about your architecture background because I think that journey is fantastic. However, tell us a little bit more about Blush Cloud now. Give the proper introduction so that people have a complete understanding of what the company is, and then we can backwards engineer your journey there.
Of course. So Blush Cloud changes the atmosphere, just as you said. We are a diversity and inclusion consultancy, and we also provide leadership coaching services. I come from the experience of the construction industry, and I know how important this is. And I also sit at the busy intersection of being a queer immigrant woman. So I come with this lived experience and a lot of the professional understanding that I've built through with a real desire to make it possible for all people to feel included in their workplaces, because I think this is what we need right now. Very desperately.
Amazing. And you're doing a fantastic job of looking at the camera, and I'm doing an awful job at it. So I'm doing
Oh, it takes a lot of focus. I just keep wanting to look at your face, and I'm just...
Do you know what?
Nope.
We can look at the face.
Nope.
Half the people are going to be listening on audio anyways. But let's enjoy ourselves. And that's amazing, as you said. And that was quite a poignant point of that you consider yourself at that point a queer immigrant. But look, right, I'm a gay man from the architecture industry as well. And I remember working in architecture practice many, many years ago in 2012. And, there wasn't many people that came out at that time. And what's interesting is that we were having a chat in the office at Larry, the architecture practice, where, everyone's open. And as I mentioned to you, we have an open, let me get it right on errors. I said it to you earlier perfectly. We have an open, non-binary trans person in Larry, and it's amazing. And we were celebrating Pride there, and I was talking about my journey as well. And what was interesting is that it seems to me now, I've been blessed, whereas the places I've worked at, I kind of feel myself. And when I've interviewed places, I haven't felt the need to kind of talk about my sexuality, but there's still a lot of work and there's still a lot of prejudice out there. And this is why I guess you're doing your awesome company. So do you want to tell me a little bit about the driver behind Blush Cloud?
So I've always been involved in various diversity and inclusion initiatives in construction. Yeah. As you can imagine, woman in architecture, woman in BIM, digital construction, I have spent many days on tables with 12 angry old white men and myself. And I kind of have felt that need. So I've been involved in things, and probably one of the first more substantial seeds for what I want to do happened at the 2019 Pride. And my heart melted. It was an amazing experience. I was extremely lucky to be on the Architecture LGBT plus float.
Oh, cool.
On the actual float.
Oh, cool.
It was... No words exist to describe what it's like to travel through an actual million people crowd and be able to scream at them and they scream back at you. It's no words. Anyway, but I've positioned myself on that float because it was obviously a cozy experience. And I got a tap on my shoulder.
Right.
And this person says, "Oh, hi, Katya, how are you?" And first moment, I couldn't even remember his name. We used to work together 3 years before that, and it was in a big company, HKS. We were working in separate buildings. We've touched bases here and there at events, but different teams, different buildings. I know his name now, but initially I was like, oh, and he was like, oh, I just really wanted to say hi and say how I really remember how out you were and all of the things that you did around. I did a bit of a presentation and push for gender neutral facilities in the company. I did a presentation to explain the benefits and planning perspective, of which there are many.
Right.
And also the violence gender non-conforming people face because of the lack of public gender neutral bathrooms. And then when the company moved a couple of months afterwards, all the facilities were gender neutral.
Oh,
so that
cool.
felt amazing.
So you did it. We'll have to have a quick round of applause for that. Look at what you've done. There you go. So HKS's office, right? It's all gender neutral. Amazing.
And then and he said, oh, because of what you've done, because of all these things, I felt more comfortable to be myself. And he was a white man. He was I think he was higher ranking than me at that point. And it just felt amazing. First of all, to remember such a long time. I mean, 3 years is 3 years. It's a bit to remember that and to have made this effect.
Yeah.
It was really amazing feeling to know that I can have that kind of effect and that this is needed. And this kind of continued to happen around LGBT, around women's issues. I tend to be someone who is happy to step up, who's happy to speak up. And through the years, I've built the vocabulary and I've built the patience to stay with these things, explain them, explore them, and put them out there for people. And when I moved to consulting as well, in situations when I haven't even been part of the collective in a company, people have come up to me to ask to participate in these initiatives because they trust me to speak for them. And it's an amazing feeling. I keep saying that, but it really is to know that you can make a space better for someone else. And last year with George Floyd's murder was something that really, really pushed me and made me commit to this immediately, because I had started thinking about it in the start of the year. And in the before world, if you want to call it like this, I was imagining maybe the next couple of years I can work in BIM and slowly transition into that as people do. But when the pandemic happened and this happened, and I really had to pause and think about what I really want to do. And, if the world is ending in a minute, it's no time to waste. Let's just get into the important stuff.
I think that's amazing, and what a fantastic journey. And you're right, it's an exciting time, but there's also a lot of work to be done as well. So it's amazing that as well you've inspired people along your journey, and that's what it's all about. I kind of feel that there's an optimistic tone with all of this. It's not like, oh my gosh, there's so much work to do and we're so far behind. Actually, it is getting there, and it's those little success stories. And I think as well now, I really love seeing a lot of architectural practices actually doing some amazing stuff around diversity and inclusivity. And what I'm talking about is not just like one picture. I'm on about actually getting people involved and doing stuff as well. And actually, I think what would be amazing for the listeners here, before we talk about your background, I would love to unpack all of what diversity and inclusivity entails. And it's a long way, but it can mean, I think it can mean different things to different people. And so a good example that we did on Accra, Larry, I talked to you about our office manager, who is fantastic. But I think another good example of in kind of inclusivity and is that at Accra Lowry, what we did is we got some students who were kind of at college level, and we talked about spending a whole day and a half and walking them through what it's like to have a career in architecture and all this stuff. And these were people from a background of not an affluent school. And to me, that's an example of inclusivity, because you're inspiring people that maybe wouldn't have had access to that, to have a career in a school. And we touched upon it before the podcast, and it's a lesson for me to record it. But, architecture is so exciting, and it's really important to have people from a background, not all one school or one certain type of demographic. It's not all an affluent background. It should be people from everywhere. And, my parents helped me get into architecture. I came from a very humble background. We had no money when I was growing up, and that doesn't need to stop people, but also we do need to give people chances. So in your words, I would love to know, how do you go about explaining diversity and inclusivity to people, Katya?
Overall, as it's obviously a very big topic, and it's really important to know there's a lot of things that are going better, but unfortunately it's not a full-on upward trajectory.
Right.
We always want to hope that the arc of history is long, and we hope that it leans towards justice. But if we examine the processes that are happening now, especially around the pandemic, there's been some significant encroaching on trans rights, specifically, even in the UK. Across Europe, there's been very, very concerning attacks on reproductive rights. In the US as well, going around racism as well. Some very, very concerning news about teaching the real history of racism and how people are limited into that. So there's a lot of movement, and there's a big rift, because there's a section of society where things seem to be going great and going in a really excellent direction. But there's another one which is kind of separating a lot, and I'm all about building bridges. And this is part of what inclusion is creating these connections in the beautiful little islands that we are, so it becomes a functional archipelago eventually. Because we are different. We can't deny that. We don't want to say we're colorblind, because we're not. And the experiences that other people have had have affected them. And we need to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
So it's about all those different experiences. In business, we often talk about women, so gender identity is important. But obviously, we need to talk about diverse genders and marginalized genders, because there are multiple of them. It's not just men and women. Race is very important. Obviously, sexual orientation and gender identity with the diverse gender identities need to be considered. Ability is something we don't talk about, or whenever we talk about, we only focus on mobility disability, and that's a very big topic which encompasses as well neurodiversity and people who are neurotypical, or people with dyslexia on the spectrum, and so on.
That, I wouldn't have thought of that. It doesn't, because it's such a broad topic. I guess I don't know whether it's my mind or because of what's close to me, but then I have an understanding of diversity and inclusivity is probably more to do with backgrounds and affluence and sexual orientation, because that's kind of closer to what I've seen or I've experienced. But when you just said that now, I wouldn't have thought of that typically straight away. But
and it's something that could all of us have output that affects people in this way, especially even if you just work online and you think, oh, my stuff is accessible because people don't need to get to places to hear it. But for example, contrast on your website is very important. Having accessibility. That was the first thing I did for my website, was to find an accessibility tool that comes kind of on the side. Yeah. And often people with dyslexia may need different contrast levels. So if it's black on white or white on black, it doesn't work for them. It just kind of all blurs out. So they need to be able to do that. People with visual impairments need to be able to make things bigger or brighter. So all of these aspects are aspects of inclusion. Similarly, having materials which are written, which are audio, which are visual in terms of pictorial rather than written, to encompass all of these abilities. And of course, what you mentioned, socioeconomic background is extremely important. And it's a huge aspect of diversity, and it's one of quite limiting things for people.
Yeah.
So there's so much to be talked about. But within architecture specifically, yes, it's amazing to have these diverse workplaces, because research shows, and I can quote you some excellent research by Dr. Catherine Phillips, that diverse groups outperform homogeneous groups categorically, not only by the quality of their decision-making, but within their consideration and the accuracy of the decision-making. However, so it's great to be working in a diverse environment, but architects are the people who create our world. We all live in the built environment. We can kind of pull stats in there, but the majority of us live in the urban space, live in the built environment. And that is, again, I'm going to say it, all of us. And if the space that is meant for all of us is just made by a certain group of people, then it's not going to serve everyone. So within architecture, we need to have a diverse view of what's needed in the world, because they may be the most amazing group of architects around the table, but if they have just had a white male privileged experience, they have no way of knowing. It's almost not their fault that they have no way of knowing what it's like to be a single black mom in a project somewhere in the US or around here in a housing estate or something like that. It just doesn't work. But within architecture, do you know what's the percentage of black women architects?
I think it's quite low.
Give it a stab.
Because my background in recruitment, yeah. So I've seen a lot of applications. I think, and so what's the stat off? And I'm going to give you a good guess right now. So I'm not gonna cop out. I'm gonna have a proper guess. What is the stat about out of all women architects? How many are black? Is that the stat? Is that
out of all architects? How many are black women?
1%. 1%.
0.3.
Oh, okay. But I was in the right. Yeah, because I was thinking that. It's low. It's so
nothing.
low.
It's nothing.
But you know what's mad is that I can think of on the top of my head, and I'm almost excited to tell you who I know are amazing black women architects. But of course, I don't want to say their names on the podcast without their permission for GDPR. But you're right, and that's annoying because they are talented, the ones I know, but it's a short list.
But also, it doesn't matter. Like, that's the other thing that could be a tip for inclusion for anyone that's listening. That kind of thing, whenever you're highlighting a particular group that's present in, oh, they're so amazing. Oh, they're so amazing. And then you remember being average is a privilege.
Yeah.
Because it's exhausting to kind of have to feel that you constantly need to be amazing to be able to say something about your experience or your needs and wants in the workplace.
Yeah, there's so much here. When you were talking there, I've got my sound effects here, but appropriate sound effects. So I was going so that was my brain exploding, right? So my brain was exploding a lot because you talked there about architecture in two senses. Because when we talked before this, I was talking about inclusivity and diversity more from a business standpoint, because I've worked with a lot of architectural practices, and there's massive tangible benefits in terms of employment, retention, and this is recruitment-y stuff. There's lots of benefits to diversity and inclusivity, people staying a long time, doing awesome architecture. But there's so you know the chap, I think his name's Ben Cannon or I think I've pronounced his surname right, but I'm going to type away on this for 1 second. So Ben, I spoke to, he's involved in the Architecture Benevolent Society, Ben Channon, okay? And so I spoke to him a while ago, and he was at a sale, okay, the architects, and he was head of well-being. And so I had the similar conversation with Ben, because I was involved in the charity, and I went, okay, what is your role, head of well-being? And part of what his role was just looking after the staff. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And he was like, yeah, it's much more than that. I'm talking about the well-being of architecture, how to design with well-being in mind. And it was the same thing you said. It blew my mind, because suddenly that's massive scope. And to do diverse and inclusive architecture, you're right, is so important, because we can influence the fabric of urban society and all this stuff. And that's truly amazing. That's a big task, though, Katya. You know, that's a lot. That's big.
Well, that's part of the architectural profession.
Yeah.
Architects it's kind of like sustainability as well. It needs to be implemented. It can't be an add-on anymore. It's integral to a design to be sustainable and inclusive.
Yes.
So it's not my job. I can give them some tips. Then when the designs start coming together, it has to be an integral part of the design.
Yeah, well, I agree. And there's something to inspire to as well, because at Acro, we really care about sustainability. So, and that's amazing. But you're right, diverse and inclusive architecture is equally important.
Diversity and inclusion and sustainability are also very deeply intertwined.
Yeah.
When you look at the United Nations list of 17 goals, these things are together as one. And diversity and inclusion addresses and critiques the patriarchal imperialist white tradition that exists in the world, that is very much celebrated in business, and that's very much the driver for a lot of the things in business that have led us to where we are environmentally. And very often when I need to talk to people about diversity and inclusion, I need to connect to the bottom line, right? Because in business, everything is about the bottom line. But I heard someone say that's not my quote, but it's a really good one. I don't remember who said it. It's important to remember that the end of the world is also bad for the bottom line. So these things kind of come together, and we need a new type of perspective. We need new kinds of qualities to celebrate in business. That's not just assertion and drive to profit, but it's a more holistic view, more sustainable and long-term development of what we're doing. And that's why I see these things very, very deeply connected.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're right. I'm like you though. There's a cynical part of me that I've learned that businesses follow the bottom line, but there's also mistakes there. So typically in recruitment, I've seen it where unfortunately people lose. Directors could lose staff because they're not being diverse or inclusive. Or a lot of the times, I think that mistakes happen in architecture practices not because they're aware of it and they ignore it. Half the time it's this running with the ball attitude, and then at the end they go, oh man, I can't believe it. Yeah, because everyone's minds is dealing with these massive projects and all this stuff, and then diversity inclusive is then perceived as like, well, yeah, that's nice, but if we don't get this project over the line and we don't get this out the door, then the business is going to fail. But then what I see happens is that people lose talented people because of these issues like we're talking about. And the quicker I can remind practices that actually hiring a recruitment consultant, which is what I used to do, is incredibly expensive, and therefore actually fixing and prioritizing issues such as diversity, inclusivity, and well-being and the benefits of your staff is a small price to pay compared to replacing someone. So,
do you know what's the actual price?
Do you have it?
Yeah. There's something I've gotten myself a lot of numbers behind everything that I'm saying, because people often attack it on its emotional side.
Yes,
diversity and inclusion, and I think it's important to put it out there because we need to wake up. We need to be a little bit more emotional about some of the things that we're doing. That's part of being more diverse in business, is bringing a slightly different side. But that's a stat I've gotten from... I have a reference for it. I know where I've written down the reference. Yeah. But to replace a member of staff whose salary is below 100K, it costs about an average 22,000.
I can
replace.
I can see that. Especially at 50 above. And so for anyone here who thinks that's mad, and Katya's mad, so I've done recruitment for 7 years. Let me try and break it down, because I could say that it's expensive to replace someone anecdotally, but I'm going to take your stat, so thank you for that. That's amazing. Because let's go through it, right? So say now, Katya leaves, okay, and I need to replace them. For argument's sake, I know you are a director right now at, your own business, okay? I know you're a director at Blush Cloud, but let's pretend you're an architectural technician again, and you're at my company. So you're at Stephen Drew Associates or whatever, and you just handed your notice in, and you're going, do you know what? There's something else popped up, and maybe you don't tell me, and this is what pops up, because it takes a brave person to say, look, I'm leaving because I don't think you're inclusive or diverse, and hats off to anyone that does that. But sometimes maybe I hear something like, do you know what? This other company's approached me, and it's an opportunity that I'd never miss, and they seem like my kind of people, right? So let's forget out the changing and all that stuff for a second. So to replace you, so you're going to be on your 1 month's notice. So I've got to look for someone. So immediately, and let's pretend you're on £50,000. So immediately, to get you through a recruiter is going to cost between £7,500 to £10,000 to find you. Then I've got to advertise the role in a few places, so that could cost money. I've also got to interview your replacement, which takes my time, and I'm a director on like 120 grand of Stephen Drew associate. So, an interview is probably like £300-400 of my time. Then I got to interview 5 people or so to have a good spread of a choice. Then there's going to be a second stage interview. And then you make an offer to someone and it's declined because it happens in life. So, yeah, it can be really expensive. It really, really, really expensive. So
and that's up to 100K. If you're looking to replace anyone higher paid than that, the graph goes exponentially up.
Yeah,
it's
it will.
much more expensive.
It will do
to replace anyone
and
else,
also
yeah.
with senior hires as well, because I'm doing that now, and I have done in the past. You're looking at people with 3 months' notice, so it's it's kind of it's tricky for a business. So it does make sense to sort this stuff out now, and that's for any practices that are listening. You should be looking at this because you have to stay ahead of the curve. And I do think that the practices that embrace these changes, there's many reasons to do it. There's a myriad, but the one that is close to me, and I can anecdotally say with confidence, is that you will attract the best talent and you will get the best people. And then you'll do the best architecture and it'll all go round and round and around because you get the awards and the practice goes up and up and up. Okay, so tell us. So now Stephen Drew Associates, I realize, oh my gosh, I need to sort it all out. So, before there wasn't many places who would tackle what you're doing head on. So Blush Cloud is one of the few that I can think of. If that, I can't actually think of another, especially in architecture. But you don't just do architecture. Does it apply to all kind of companies then?
I'm open to all sectors. I work with different clients. I've recently branched out in the higher education sector, and I've gotten myself as a preferred supplier to the University of Portsmouth to do that.
That's cool.
Kind of coaching and facilitating.
Good, the university as well, aren't they?
It's very, very exciting. There's a lot of conversations to be had there as well. Obviously, I work with people within the industry because this is where my contacts lie, and this is the easiest start. I work also with an organization called My G Work, which may be something that you may be interested in.
Familiar. Isn't it like two twins that set it up or something?
Yep.
I've not met them. The famous twins, though. I've heard of them.
Yeah.
It's a bit like the Facebook twins in my head. I'm sure they're lovely guys, but I'm just like, you just don't get many twins, do you, around? So
yeah, I know. Yeah. I work with a well-being agency as well, and I'm very open to all sorts of different businesses. Within the construction industry, we also have Built by Us, who was founded by Dana Walker, and they do somewhat similar work as well. And she is just an amazing person.
I want to get
the way
involved.
she speaks, she is. Yeah, I can listen to her for ages. I used to mentor with them in the Fluid program, so I know her well, and she's just an astounding woman. But I'm a big believer that, first of all, the tide rises all the ships. I don't believe in competition in that way, and I connect to organizations like that very openly and happily, and because I really think that there's too much work, for sure, for all of us, and it is the sort of work that the better one of us is doing, all of us will be doing better. There's Utopia as well, which is kind of a wider organization, and they kind of have a slant towards advertising as well, and they're really great. And they also build their own network with other consultants, and it's a generally quite open and communicative community within diversity and inclusion warriors, if I can call us this way.
Yeah, go for it. I love that, and so I think we'll touch upon your roots in a second. I have one question to segue into it, and that's because there's an element of what you do is it's amazing that you speak into people maybe on one-to-ones, and you go into businesses as well, and it makes sense because you come from architecture. It seems to me that you understand. It helps understanding that world, so you can probably while you can work with a lot of companies, what your background is going to be immensely valuable to architecture. Kind of like when I went into recruitment, it helps that you work in architecture because you know what you're talking about, and you can kind of see where you need to fix things. But before we talk about your background, so you're a coach. Now I do a bit of coaching, so you can give me a bit of advice online because I've done I've started last month. Oh my gosh, I got 2 things. Oh, well, I said last month. but this is in September. So I started 4 months ago. There you go, covered it. No one will notice. And
I don't know what you're talking about.
oh, I was just saying because we're going to launch this in
No, I'm
September.
joking.
Oh
Keep going,
no,
keep going.
I did it again.
You ruined it.
I ruined it. So I had quite a few people, and then this month's been less busy, and that will change, I'm sure. Right. Coaching Academy. You've been to the Coaching Academy. Was that useful? Because there's part of me, and you tell it like it is. I'm like, I've got my degree in architecture. I got my diploma. I've done recruitment. I've done all this stuff. Maybe it would be really useful, but I've also done a lot of studying in my time. So was the Coaching Academy useful? And does that help the way you teach and mentor and coach people?
So the first mentoring training that I had was way back in 2009.
Okay.
So,
Wow.
and I've been involved in mentoring throughout. I've mentored with the Stephen Lawrence Trust, which is now called Blueprint for
Yeah,
All.
I know Neil. Yeah, he's cool.
Yeah, Neil Onions. Yep. I work with him. And then Built by Us, and then with Women in BIM, I created the Women in BIM mentoring scheme, which went global. We had the first round, we had applicants from 23 different countries, and now they're running that program for a second year, which is amazing because the work has paid off in a way. So I've had this background, and especially when you're BIM consulting, you can't approach someone who spent a decade in education and go to them and say, yo, listen, I'm going to tell you how to do your job in a new way. It's just not gonna work. Doesn't matter what kind of genius tool you have or method or principle, doesn't matter. You need a different approach. You need to understand what these people need and then try and figure out how to give it to them and then fit in with the ISO
Right.
or whatever is required at the time. So I always had this kind of approach. And when I started studying with the Coaching Academy, it started giving me a body. It started giving me slightly better vocabulary and reasoning for doing the things that I was doing.
Ooh.
There were some new techniques that I really grabbed onto immediately, but it was a double process for me. And that course that I did was quite long. And the Coaching Academy is the largest coaching qualification body in the world.
Oh, is
that was
it?
one of the reasons.
Yeah, because I've seen a few of them. So this is why I know we're live on an episode, but I'm also writing down notes here of which one to go to. So it's the biggest.
I'll give you specific recommendations.
Okay, thank you.
So you can take a lot of that course, but because it is the largest, they're big groups of people.
Right.
And sometimes that could feel... To me, I struggled a little bit with that. I've signed up for 2 other courses with them. So with the base, which is coaching, we were about 180 people on calls. And then I'm doing executive coaching, which is a specification, which we get like 20 something, 30 people, and it's an entirely different experience.
Right.
But I have done, and I think this is what's going to really be helpful to you, I've done a specifically career coaching with the career counseling service.
Oh, yeah. There we go.
And
you speak your music to my ears.
Yep. And that course was 5 days in total, but 5 full days across, I think, 2 or 3 weeks. Right. And we were 12 people in the group. I know those people now. I'm friends with some of them. Oh, cool. It was excellent, and I really, really appreciated that. And maybe for what you're doing, this could be much more appropriate, and then I can recommend you a couple of books. So instead of doing a full year the way I did with that course, you can do these 5 days, and I'll tell you 2 books to read, and you're covered, I think.
I love it. You hit it your life. But you know what? I'm okay with saying I do not know everything. I am still learning, and that would be useful because I've got a lot of practical experience to offer people. I'm sure what you learn from this and the way you do your business now is that it's to sometimes know how to deliver that. And also, we're all different, and certain people respond in different ways. And I've got to learn on that therapy way. So I had a really good chat with Karen. And so Karen is on a podcast episode, which will be out.
Karen Fugo?
Yeah. It will be out before this one. And
of course,
of course, and she gave me some great advice as well, because part of what you're doing as well, I'm sure, is sometimes when I do a session, you're almost dying to tell people the answers. Like, oh, you got to do this or that.
No,
And you
no, no,
can't
no,
do
no,
that.
no,
You got to
no, no,
let
no.
people learn. They got to go along the journey. And you got to, and that's what I've done in recruitment, is that I've learned that there's a few types of approaches to recruitment. I had an incredibly low dropout rate because it's about listening to what the people want and then finding them those opportunities and letting them decide they want to go there, rather than the old idea of recruiters, which are just like, come on, you want to do it.
Salespeople.
Yeah, it's super sales, because don't work. And then I don't want to be the reputation of, oh my gosh, that Steve guy did this and that. Whereas actually this approach, while you could make less money than a recruiter with no values,
To start with.
Exactly. You get much more value because in the industry, your reputation is not tarnished and people trust you. And that is worth much more, which is hopefully what I've done. Yeah, you know, it's like that. I do care about architecture. So this is what I've learned in coaching. This is now, how do I translate what I've learned in recruit? You know, that's 7 years of getting people to come to it and do that. And it's difficult. So I imagine that when you, and we don't want to know specifics about clients or anything like that, I imagine you've almost got to have this approach with the companies that you meet, haven't you? You've got to understand their perspectives, see what their successes and failures, and try to, like Inception style, put these little ideas in their heads so that they come to the conclusion.
Well, that's certainly something that I could do.
Right.
But also, to me, the best outcome is when it is an open discussion and people don't feel like I've put something in their head.
Yes.
that kind of goes into maybe hidden style sales techniques as well. And
no, so
that's not.
Yeah, so you need the stats like you did now, and you've got to offer value. So what's your general approach when you? So say now you were speaking to me, and I'm running a Stephen Drew practice as well. Would it be a combination of you evaluate the company, and then you sit down with me and you listen to what's going wrong or right, and then you offer suggestions? And is that middle level? Is that more accurate?
Well, first and foremost, what I do is I need to know what you want. I need to know what your values are.
Yeah.
And where do you want to go? I need to understand that they're happening throughout.
Yeah.
You know, if there's a team of people who are responsible for this decision making, I need to see if they're on the same page with those things and figure out what they want. What are they aiming with this? You know, is it a tick box? Do they want to see increase in something specific? I try to speak their language. That's important, and it needs to be adaptable. So I worked with a digital construction company, and with them, I was very strict about how did some self-assessment before that on the team I worked with and after that, and really translated things into numbers, because they do information management. They want to see numbers, and I try to bring that forward to them in that way. If you're an organization that wants to see an influx of certain type of people, then we figure out what the message is in there, and then I help you understand what kind of things will lead you to the things that you want. But it is highly individual, and that's where coaching comes in, and that's why I really got into coaching, and I enjoyed that course, like that full year of getting into things and reading the right books and practicing as well. And I've done a lot of hours of one-on-one coaching purely to sharpen my tool.
Right.
Because ultimately I want to work with organizations, but it's very valuable when you kind of really shape things out one-on-one. And reading more and more about coaching-led organizations, they really connect for me to the principles I've read about in Native American governing and social justice organizing.
Wow.
And this really, there's a soundboard sound for you. It really clicks for me.
Okay, it's a magic
Sure.
wand, but we'll take it, right? Light bulb
I
moment.
like the snap of fingers, but it really rang a loud bell for me that there is something very valuable there, because it is about arriving to this decision that everybody is happy with genuinely. And that is possible when there is sufficient discussion for it. And sometimes it can feel tiring, especially at the start when you feel like you're just talking too much and explaining yourself too much. But again, this is sustainable development, because once you practice enough this kind of working, this kind of decision making, it becomes easier and easier. And then you're not losing all that time dealing with problems that are caused by the fact that half of the staff or half of the leadership were not happy with this anyway to start with. So because of that, I just kind of delved into coaching, and I was like, this is the thing that's going to bring it together. Because if you talk to people about diversity, especially if you talk to people who are outside of these marginalized groups, which will often be the people that have the money and are making the decisions in these companies, they're already outside of the conversation. You know, they're already excluded from this conversation. And that's not the case, because we all know that sexism is a man problem. Racism is a white people problem, you know, and everybody needs to be part of that change. And everybody needs to understand how much benefit there is to them about this, because there is.
Oh, well said, well said. Oh, gosh, I was a bit late there with the clap because I was thinking about what you were saying. But it's true. There's so much to do, and it's an exciting time. So I was listening and soaking it in. I know this is a podcast, but this is also like it's almost turned into I'm getting tips off you at the moment from my little part of the business. So, but I love what you said, because working with a company is amazing. You're right, though. Because the coaching bit on the Architecture Social is a side part, and it's great because, okay, there's a little bit of revenue there. That's not the main thing, though, because it's actually about helping people out with their problems. And so when I got my first good Google review, there's no other bad one. It's just one good one. So hopefully there'll be more. That sounded bad there. I had one good one and several bad ones. No, I had a good one, and that meant a lot, because I just said, oh, you know, I hope it's gone well. And I really helped with the job search. But what I was more proud of is that I didn't insert my opinions everywhere. I listened, so you'd be happy with that. So I did all right there. Yeah. But that's hard, isn't it, when you're not used to it? And it was with an hour session. And so trying to get something out of an hour is, you have to be really focused, don't you? Especially because if it's not going to be a few sessions, then I think you've got to be really focused. And I had another chat with a chap who messaged me the other day, and he said that he would like to switch careers. And so I had to be really transparent as well, because it would be amazing right now because I'm starting my coaching business, and revenue is important because you have to keep the lights on. But at the same time, I had to be really honest. And I was like, do you know what? To switch from architecture, we're not going to accomplish that in 1 hour. That's a big gig. As you know, and we'll touch upon it in a bit in this, is that to go through the processes of actually moving away from architecture is a lot. And the first step is like, do you really want to move away from architecture? Or is there something wrong with your current job, or what you're not getting? And there's so many factors. And I kind of had to be really true and honest and say, look, I think that's a bigger project. And, you really need to think about if we sign on for that. Then that's a bigger commitment, because in an hour, I think you can really bash out a CV or portfolio or talk about directions in terms of where you're going, but there's only so much you can achieve based upon the time. Also, the kind of the last question that just popped up in my brain before we talk about how you got into this, and I'd love to know that story, is that commitment, time, energy. You have to be really transparent about it. So half of coaching as well is also learning if people actually really want to do what they're saying. And that's very different, isn't it? And
oh, yes.
And that's a beauty. I was trying to word it in my head, because I've got a good detector over the years in recruitment who is really looking, who is really in a bit of an issue, or who is window shopping, or who is not, who maybe is just like, I don't know, not committed. And I think with what I've learned with coaching, there's a similar thing. And actually, the benefits of coaching are for the person, but they have to put the work in. So there's two things in coaching, is that if you come to me to prove that your way of doing it is right, I don't want to hear that. Or let me. You're not going to convince me if it's right, if it's wrong, if it's right. Even if
Doesn't
I'm.
matter.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it requires a person to actually want to change and want to go the mile and to see the benefits. And so
For
I
sure.
imagine you get that a lot. And so, but what I find though is most people do want to change, and that's what.
People who reach out for it, they really do. But there's a lot of people who want the fix as well. And whenever I need to explain what coaching is, it's easier to kind of explain it within the context of mentoring and consulting.
Yeah.
Because with consulting, you come in and you give advice. You know, there's a gap in whatever this person's knowledge or experiences is, and they need to fill it, and you have the expertise. You come, assess the situation, give them advice, and you're paid for it, right? And you carry the responsibility that this advice manifests in the desired results, right? In the middle of this gradient, there's mentoring, which is often voluntary and charitable, which is great, but it's a 50-50 relationship, right? There's a 50-50 responsibility about what's going on.
Yeah.
And within mentoring as well, it's not great to give direct advice. Really, no, people don't respond well when you tell them what to do. Nobody really does. Nobody really sticks with it. It's not a sustainable thing. It's about sharing an experience, but you're still sharing an experience.
Yeah.
And, you have a similar direction or something like that. And then you have coaching, where the entirety of the responsibility lies within the coachee for the results. So you start with a much more directive intervention. You go to the mentoring, which is kind of 50-50, and then you go to an entirely non-directive intervention, which is coaching, where the coach doesn't need to have any similar professional experience, because they're there to ask the correct questions. They're there to move the person forward. But that person needs to want to make that change. They need to be on board with being challenged.
Well, look, I think it's amazing. And look, we could talk about that for a long time. And so I'm sure we will pick that up again. But in fairness to the virtual listeners out there as well, because it's not fair that I learn all my stuff on coaching on the podcast. Look, that's all impressive. And I think it's really useful and valuable information to share. But I touched upon there a little bit about the story of someone approaching me to switch careers. Now, I did it moving from a part two to a recruitment consultant. Not quite the same thing as you. I had a lot of people saying, "What are you doing? Are you crazy?" Imagine you had one or two people going like that. "Why are you giving up your architecture career?" Yeah, like, so we both had a similarity on that front. And look, that's inspirational, because I meet a lot of people that want to change careers in architecture. But let's talk about that journey a little bit. So tell us about, so I'm familiar with you from the amazing stuff that you did in BIM. But do you want to tell us about, you mentioned you were at HKS as an architectural technician. So you studied architecture, and the goal was to become an architectural technician, BIM, guru, right?
The goal was to become an architect, to qualify as an architect. But touching upon diversity with socioeconomic background, doing my first degree of architecture, I was working 2 part-time jobs. Anyone who's done a degree in architecture knows how much time the degree requires. Imagine adding 2 part-time jobs on top of that. I was shredded in the end. Yeah. My mental health was in the gutter. It was extremely hard. Because I used to run tables in Wagamama in university, and I would spend the whole weekend 12-hour shifts running tables, getting back home on a Sunday evening at 1:00 and starting to work for my studio the next day through the night.
I used to work in Waitrose as well. I get it. I was stacking shelves with her, but I had 1 part-time job. I didn't have 2. That's a lot.
Through the week, I was doing mentoring and stuff with the educational liaison with the university. I was working with kids and young people and stuff like that, which is really it's kind of the seed what's brought me here as well. And I have a lot of gratitude for all of my experiences, but it was really hard. And when I started working as an architectural assistant first, and after the first year, as everyone, I applied. I got into Greenwich University, and I sat down and I put the numbers on a piece of paper, and I just couldn't put myself through this again. I just looked at it and I knew that I wasn't going to be able to make ends meet, or if I did, I was going to completely bust my mental health to a degree that wouldn't be acceptable. So I stayed. I initially I pushed it one more year to kind of figure out what to do, because I went in to architecture with a lot of passion, and I love the idea of it. I was extremely lucky with the first practice I worked with, Murphy Phillips Architects. They were genuine teaching practice, and I learned so much from them. And even at the end of the second year working with them, when I decided that I'm gonna move into BIM more, because I was really good at it and because it was more profitable. They knew I was going to leave, and they let me run a small refurbishment project just to get more of that experience. They were amazing. I'm still in contact with a lot of the people there. And it was healthcare architecture. And then I moved on to and did more healthcare with HKS. And healthcare is very data-driven. For anyone that works in healthcare, they know that the NHS comes to you with a database before you even start any design.
What's it called? A code book or something, isn't it?
There's various. Codebook is one of them. Not ABC, ADC. There was another abbreviation. I used to teach that one, and I've forgotten it. What was the name of that? But they came in with that. They come in with that before any design has started. So it's a fertile soil for a good digital asset to come out of that. And also they have a very significant interest that you give them a good digital asset, because they run the buildings, and it's very sensitive how you run them. It's very different. I've had a spell within residential architecture, and it's nothing like that.
No, it's very different. Very different.
Nope. So that's the reason I kind of got into BIM as well, is because I was so familiar with that, and it was something very intuitive to me. I got it, and it kind of worked. And then with HKS, again, I was very lucky with the team, because I just had my BA, but I've always been a proactive person. I have the experience. I step in, I take responsibility. It's just me. It's a personality kind of thing.
Yep.
And quite quickly I started running. I was doing several major construction packages on the Midland Metropolitan Hospital. And just because there was the space and people trusted me, I went in and did the work.
Yep.
And that was what pushed me into looking more into Dynamo and visual programming. And I trained myself on all of that and just continued to push with it.
Yeah.
And then the opportunity with Archilizer came about with Dejan Nenov.
I know him. I met him years ago. He's very smart, very smart.
He's brilliant.
He
is really, really
yeah,
great.
I met him at the cusp of, I think he was in between roles at the time. And I know this is not the main topic today, so I'll touch upon it lately. But many years ago, I think especially 2015, there wasn't many people that could use BIM or Revit. And so it was kind of this new exciting phase, and it was really hard to find people who knew what they were talking about. And I think in the end he joined he joined the chap from Grimshaw who now runs design, a new company with Design Tech as, and David Flynn. Is that right? He worked with David Flynn.
So first they were together at Design Tech.
Yeah.
And then Dejan stepped away to do his own thing, and then Design Tech got bought by Instoa, and now
that's a whole different. That's a whole different.
That's a whole nother.
But but I guess what I'm trying to say, even with that story there, with BIM, there's so exciting, but then there's also it's a totally different, crazy, exciting world in that you're talking about companies bought out and changed, and there's an element with it, especially now. I think it's more like startup companies because you have this new, exciting world, and it's less. Like sometimes in architecture, there is the way that people have been doing it for a while. But with all these emergent BIM technologies, you got 4D and all this stuff. It's a new world, isn't it? There altogether.
100%, and the velocity with which my career developed after I properly rebranded as a BIM consultant has nothing to do within architecture, because I got a lot of very interesting and valuable experience, and people would refer to me as someone with certain power in the meetings, but it was never reflected with my salary or the name of my position.
Yes.
Because architecture is so
hierarchies.
traditional.
Yeah, because you're a part 2 or you're a whatever. You're not qualified, so you're stuck at a low
There's
salary.
a lot of gates with a lot of very muscular gatekeepers. And even if you're doing the work, very often you just can't get there. And there's nothing here to disrespect to the people who have gone through the educational process. But we have been discussing the educational process as well for a while, and I'm so excited to see that there's architectural apprenticeships now.
Yes.
Because the way it's set up, it's extremely elitist. And I had a great time studying architecture, and it's fun. It's fun. It definitely develops certain part of your brain that you won't necessarily tap into with the work that you're doing. But if you imagine the architectural process, the stuff that we do in school exists over here. Let's be real, and all the rest of it you learn on the job. And to have to invest the amount of money and time to stay and continue to exercise this part, it just doesn't necessarily work. Yeah. But anyway, with BIM, there's just so much more space to grow. And Dejan was so amazingly wonderful to me, and he opened up and he offered me the position, and it's actually his second pilot, and it really empowered me to just get on with things and go out there and do things. And within the first year, I was already speaking at most of the construction.
I remember. Because you see bits pop up online everywhere, don't you? And I think that's amazing. And public speaking is the more you do it, I enjoy it as well. I'm not far from an expert. I do enjoy it, but it takes a lot of guts to do, because at first, I was saying it to someone the other day, is like, at first when you do it, I used to get very nervous, and you do live streams, I'm so nervous, but it's such a great skill. So did you enjoy all the public speaking then?
A lot. Yeah. I really, really enjoyed it. It's something I never had an opportunity to exercise before. Yeah. I come from a very academic education. We never had like plays in school or things like that. And I just found myself really, this is, because you get the butterflies, but like once you're in front of people and you kind of see that what you're saying has an effect here and here and here and here, it's really great and kind of keeps you going. Yeah. And within digital construction specifically, I think I really hit the sweet spot, because there's a lot of experts. There's a lot of really amazing people that do things far, far more complex than I've ever even set my sight on. Yeah. But there is this approachability that's missing very often. There's often, this kind of someone who looks like this and is trying to tell you something and just really ends up making you feel a little bit stupid.
I know, and reading off a piece of paper.
And I'm not this. I've never been this.
No.
I genuinely believe that, especially when you're addressing construction professionals, predominantly architects, these are smart people. When you look at them and you tell them, I trust you to get this because I know you're great. If you have this at the back of your mind, even if you don't verbalize it, but if you approach it with that kind of attitude, they do. They really do. And it has a brilliant impact. And it's really fun.
Oh, well, there you go. That was some good. There were some good little tips in there for anyone public speaking. And I think it develops over time, doesn't it? The more you do it, the better you get. And maybe that's how, like, already our conversation, I feel, is slow and natural. But there's this ability, I think, over time that we can all learn that you have to trust yourself first of all. And the other thing is that I tell people never to do a script. Just know one or two key things which are important. And you can kind of get there in conversation. And I think that's a lot better than reading a page that's printed out in front of you.
So you definitely don't want to read anything, for sure. But for example, I always write it out exactly as I imagine saying it. Oh. Mainly because I think one of the key places where you feel safe with a speaker, because that's the thing is, being in a public speaking position is a position of power, right? You're standing in front of people, and what you're saying is, I'm important enough for you to listen to me. So an audience is enjoying that if you keep them safe. If you, with your behavior and with the things that you're saying, you're conducting the situation, so they just need to listen. But if you're insecure or you're not sure what's coming next, and maybe you're not sure how they're reacting, they start feeling responsible for that. And that's not what they signed up for. And that's not enjoyable. And one of the places where you can really catch this is with your transitions, when you're moving from one point to another. And that's why I write everything out. So once I have seen what I want to say as a full completed body, I don't ever read it. I have here next to me, these are some of the courses that I teach. And I have it in cards, and I have the cards in my hands.
Wow, you're so organized.
Yeah, they're always next to me over here. And I have some important points like marked up if I feel like I need to know where the places are to just... If you're teaching something that's 4 hours, you need a little bit of a support in some of them.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah.
It's more just to... My brain knows that there is a connection. My brain has seen it once, so I'll always be able to get back to it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And do you know what? I'm almost laughing in my head because this is what I need, because I am a person that I've got no lists. I start something and I've got one to-do list, okay? And sometimes I drive people mad because so Sanat Bassam, who I love to death, and I've done lots of projects with her, she's so organized. And every time I look at the stuff she's done, I'm just like, oh, I've really got to sort myself out. So I don't do any of that, and I think that I would benefit from some structure. But everyone's different, aren't they? So what I've learned is that it's good to have some, and then I free flow. And I think for very structured people, sometimes I try to encourage them to go, ooh, just a little bit unstructured, and like let yourself go a little bit. So, okay. So look.
Someone, just to tell you one fun quote, which I think you're going to appreciate.
Yeah.
One of the people that I've learned the most from in terms of public speaking, Deborah Francis White. She's an amazing podcaster, guilty feminist, awesome.
Ooh.
She says, just start a sentence and trust your brain to finish it.
Oh, I like that. I like that a lot. Although, and you're right. The other thing that I've learned as well, though, is that it has today, like I came into this podcast with an open mind and then that trust in it will be okay, and it free flows. What I've done, there's a few episodes that no one's commented on, but we can all be our worst critic as well. And so I've listened back to a few, and what I notice is that when I'm more stressed in my personal life or my professional life, my questions are more muddled in the podcast. And it's not many people no one's commented to me yet. What I will do, though, is when I'm stressed or all this stuff, is that they will take longer to get to that journey, because in my brain, while I'm saying them, I'm kind of working out that journey. I'm not trusting where the sentence will go. And yeah, it's a bit of a shame because, and there you go, you've got all this to come with your podcast as well. But I try not to be too harsh on myself. And the other thing that I've learned personally is that I've seen one or two of my friends in the past, especially when I was studying. And there's a good story I always remember. Oh gosh, I can't say his name here, but I'll call it Jeff. So Jeff is a dear friend of mine, and he was a perfectionist, and I wasn't. And he had a much stronger project than me in part 2. But because he was a perfectionist, he didn't finish it, and he had a lower grade than me. Whereas I, unperfected or whatever, I got a 2-1. And what I try to do with the Architecture Socialist, because lots of the stuff that I've done, it's not perfect. Or it's like you run a website, and it's like, I mean, I'm proud of my website, but there's always stuff to do. When you were talking earlier about high contrast, I was like, at first I was going to be like, you're going to love my website because it's all black and white. But then I was like, damn, you mentioned that that doesn't work. And so there's always stuff to do. But the thing I do now is that I kind of have to discipline myself not to look. I learn a few lessons, not to look back and then just improve the upcoming content. So in this podcast, I've tried to have nice sleep. I've tried to be more relaxed, and then hopefully the quality of the questions will be higher. And it's like that ongoing process. But how do you feel about that and that kind of perfectionism trait that sometimes architects have, and this need to kind of it to be perfect? What do you encourage in your coaching sessions?
Woof. I like to say done is better than perfect.
Yay, me too.
And to be honest, I learned, I got myself out of perfectionism in architecture school and in the very start of my my first architectural assistant job, because I'm naturally as a young person, as a teenager, I was very like, I was a straight A student. I was just, everything had to be perfect and everything had to be done. But it was a very different environment because, as I said, very academic education. It was very much about presenting out the same facts you've heard, which just happened to be something I was good at. It doesn't necessarily measure, I don't think, intelligence. I just fitted that particular mold of education.
Yeah.
And that's also a question of inclusivity that we don't have to go into right now. But with the project that we had to do in architecture school, just like the first few times, just going in for that ideal version of things and like how I want them to be, and then just falling on my butt, excuse my French, and realizing that it's impossible to do things like that in the time that I have. Little by little, I started working backwards on things and just aiming for a finished product. And yeah, it's definitely something that, I mean, very often people who seek coaching, they want to improve, and that comes from a desire to be great. And that's part of the other thing about coaching is it's all about goals, but it's not about goals at all. Because you start off with fleshing out the goal. That's very, very fundamental. As you said, you need to understand what these people want, but it's also about the biggest value is the learning journey. Learning how to learn from yourself. Because if you set yourself a super unrealistic goal, as a coach, when someone starts telling you, you can't tell them, this is bonkers, you can't do this. Because first of all, it's mean. It's not very nice. But also, how do you know? Because you'll never know everything that's happening with this person. And secondly, they need to walk that journey to then be able to look back and see where were the points of learning for them. And that is the biggest treasure, because if you do that for once or twice with someone, walk that path with them, then they don't need you. Ultimately, that's what coaching is about. This is not therapy. It's not counseling. It's not about digesting things and kind of sitting with stuff. It's about learning how to learn from yourself.
Oh, sorry. I kind of jumped in. I got to stop doing that. Learning. Okay. Say that again, because I cut you off. It's learning.
It's all right. It's learning how to learn from yourself. Right. And you can do that. And then it gets back to that sustainable growth.
Very good. Well, I tell you what, do you know what? Because we're approaching like the hour 10 mark, and I could be here forever. We'll have to, what I think is that diversity, inclusivity, all the stuff you do, it's so vast. Maybe what I would say live here is I'd love to put out on an open invite, because I do some live streams as well on LinkedIn and YouTube. And maybe if there's a particular topic that you have in mind, we can thrash it out together. What I was going to say, though, is that you should have your podcast around the time that this airs again, which is amazing. And I encourage people to listen to that. But before we end, I try to, and it's a bit of fun, now ask if you have any questions for me. It shouldn't all be one way, isn't there? Or it can be one or a few. We can go as long as you want. Do you have any questions?
Absolutely. So the Architecture Social has been your baby.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What makes you the happiest about it?
Oh man. It's not even a burden. It is a blessing. I enjoy it. To me, there's a lot of all the ideas that I've seen over the years. It's kind of like it is my project. And so bizarrely, while I don't do architecture anymore, there's an element of design in it. And I'm always trying to design something around the community and where I can find value. And now my current challenge, being really transparent, is how to monetize it in a self-sufficient way that I can keep it going, because currently I'm paying the costs for the website, which is quite substantial. It's adding up. And so it's about doing that in a way which doesn't change the values and doesn't have any shadow on what I'm doing. So what I mean is, if, for instance, I don't want to be bought out. We talked about the topic earlier about these startup companies, and they join a big company and suddenly they change stuff. That ain't going to work for me. And I think that the reason the social works is because hopefully that there's this transparent nature of helping people out, and there's this free flow voice which is developing and people can influence it. And I think that I'm really careful about keeping that, because without that, there's no point. And the baseline of when I'm designing the stuff is that I try to design something that I would find useful as a part 1 and part 2. But I'm often making mistakes, Katya. I'm often making mistakes. And actually right now is that, so the community part of it, so there's like an online forum was super buoyant and supportive, and that was used massively, especially during the lockdown. People were on it all every day. People were like 300 to 400 people were logging in every day. I think it's like 4,000 users now. Yeah, which is cool. And less people are on the forum right now. But bizarrely, the website traffic is through the roof. So people read articles on there, and a lot of people show into the live stream. And so the YouTube channel is growing as well. So my question to myself on my brief is to make it constantly relevant and useful, and hopefully have a positive impact. And that's the challenge right now, is I have to make it self-sustainable so that it can keep doing that, but doing it in a way which is not, it doesn't alter it. So if Autodesk out there want to put a little banner somewhere, I'll let you do it. But if someone wanted to, for instance, change it fundamentally, I wouldn't do that. And I think like the initial goal, where it came from, was that I thought it would be great to help part 1s and part 2s find jobs during the pandemic, because I used to be a part 2, and it sucked looking for a job during the 2009 economic crisis, which is when I left university. And now it's kind of evolved, because that's one problem I have, is that I like to do everything. So I was like, oh, we'll do a podcast, we'll do this and that. So hopefully there's like a method in the madness, but that is my current challenge. Hopefully I answer that in a roundabout way. Basically, I have lots going on. And
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Please, as many as you want.
I'm just going into my coaching shoes. So
Cool.
what I'm hearing you say is that you're looking forward to the next step of the architecture social, and that has to do with monetizing. But what's fundamental for you is that it remains relevant and useful.
Yep. Correct.
So who are you having conversations with to ensure that it remains relevant and useful?
The community, the users. That's the majority of them right now.
How are you recording the results of these conversations?
Polls. And I've got messages, but not much other. Maybe I need to do more.
I mean, it sounds like you're already on the path, because you identified what's important to you.
Yeah.
And you are asking the people who are relevant, and you're collecting that information. It's not just that you're chin wagging about, what's relevant or useful. You're recording it, you're looking at it.
Yeah.
It's a process. You need a second to compile that new information, and it's going to open up to you.
Yeah, and I think the other bit is I try to ask all the time employers how they see it as well, because it's a two-way thing. If you want to help people get jobs, there's the side which is the job seeker, but then there's the employer. And so I think that and more of that is going to be useful, because the more and more you understand the architecture practice and the business and the appeal, then the better. What are their stress points? What are they looking for? Where the value of the social could come? So, for example, having access to them, to students and architects who are looking, is fantastic. But then it goes the other way, it's reciprocal. So how do you attract the best people? And then that's why it kind of feeds into a little bit about what we're talking about, because, at some point as well, especially right now, before in the pandemic, there was less jobs out. So an employer had a choice of lots of people. Whereas right now, the market shifted. So talented people have a lot of choice. So I think the big question for employers is, how do you showcase your awesome strengths so that people see it? But you kind of have to have the strengths there to showcase. You have to be diverse. You have to be inclusive. And then how do you speak about that? Because that's another challenge as well, because you've got this is like my theory, and what I'm learning at the Ackroyd Lowry is that we try to do the things right, and that's a lot to begin with, and always learning, and then how do you communicate that with everyone in this incredibly noisy online area, and how do you engage people? It's an art form, and I think that's what I'm learning as well. And so another way to answer your question is that, so I ask stuff, but I inadvertently learn stuff like data. So I'll tell you one, like, because I'm conscious of your time as well, but I'll tell you one story, and you might, this is quite relevant for your background. So on the Architecture Social last year, one of the things I did was, with this chap who was fantastic, we did a series of Grasshopper and Dynamo online courses and Revit courses, and they were completely for free. And I thought, this is going to be amazing. Everyone's going to do it. And we advertised it. Advertise is free. And so you could sit down on the weekend and be live. And a few people went. So that was cool. But it wasn't a huge number. I thought it'd be hundreds, right? But it was very few. And then we did a competition where the competition was that you had all these Revit files. You had a video where the guy Simon wrote it. And people had to submit the work, and they had to do a few drawings. They had to design their own building. They had to put it in Revit, and then I would give them a book. So I had all these books ready to go, and no one entered. Whereas what I learned is that if I do certain events, or I post a job, or I do a talk, more people would come. And so what I learned is that not always what I think is the right thing is what people participate in. And the other thing is that I've learned is that just like you touched upon earlier, because I do a video and I tell people what I think is right, doesn't mean that people do it. And that's why I think that there's a big piece which I'm learning, which is accountability. And that's why one thing with coaching is that financial transaction to me actually means a lot, because it means that people commit. And I think that sometimes when things are for free, people are not committing. So the fact of paying me means you take yourself seriously, and it means I take it seriously. Whereas with this free Revit course, while I know people are busy, it didn't work. And so I learned something from that, because on paper it seems amazing, but it didn't, no one was interested. Therefore, it wasn't relevant. So I constantly have to do stuff which people engage in and people can learn from. And also, I think that, and this is, I can't substantiate this is anecdotal again, I do think that the pretense is that there's a lot of free stuff online, but I don't think that free means quality. And I think so.
But see, sorry to interrupt you. See, you think this way as well. You don't think free means quality.
Not always.
Yeah, well, similarly, the people who would look at this free course would have the same thought.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Whereas my initial idea was we will do it completely for free, but there was no take up. So it's kind of like a balance. So I'm not, I've not fully worked it out, but you can, because there's a part of me where the Architecture Social will always be free. We will always help students out. But that's why the challenge of monetizing it kind of works as well. So how could you do it in a non-intrusive way? And it is getting there. Maybe when this podcast is released, I'll have the answer. And we'll work it out.
You have a minute.
Yeah. But look, there's so much amazing stuff. Unless you have a burning question for me. Do you have any other question?
I think I'm good. Thank you.
Amazing. All right. Oof. I kind of felt the pressure like I was being interviewed there. Ooh, it's a hot room here. But that's amazing. Okay, so we covered so much today. It was amazing to learn about your company, what was important to you, your values, your background, all the amazing stuff that you've got coming up as well. I can't wait for your podcast. Now that we've done this together, you will forever be you will be part of the Architecture Social alumni. But if you want me to do anything with help out or anything, and the Architecture Social live stream is open to you to use however you want. People can find you on LinkedIn. They can connect with you, Katya. They just Google Katya Veleva, and you can find you. And check out Flash Cloud and stick around and drop messages. And if you're not on the Architecture Social already, I will drop you an invite for that, because then people connect with you there. On that
of course, I'm on the Architectural Social already, Stephen. What are you talking about?
Of course! There you go. I've dropped myself a clanger before where I go like, you're on there, and people go, I'm not. And I'm like, oh. Of course you are. That's amazing. Thank you so much for being here. I am going to end this podcast now. What I forgot to say, and we'll keep it in live, is that stick around for 1 minute because it's going to upload. But everyone that's listening, have a fantastic day. I'm going to play the outro now, and we will see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.